This is Mary Collins from LifeHakx Media on Radio X, and I am back in online with Romain Charles, our participant in Mars mission 520 days of confinement. And so in a previous interview, I was referring it to as isolation because for many of us, even though we might actually have family members that we're with, it still feels like isolation because you're not going out and doing the things you would regularly do. However, there is a big difference between confinement and isolation. And Romain is going to tell us.
So yes, I was talking about isolation for Mars 102 at the beginning, but then I was reminded that actually isolation is when if anything happens to you, you are on your own. You have to deal with it. Whereas confinement, you can still get help from the outside. You are confined, so you cannot do everything that you would do outside. But if anything bad, like a serious illness, or if a fire would break out in the Mars 100 modules and we couldn't control it, then we would still be able to go outside of those modules, get help. So that's the big difference between confinement and isolation. And if I may continue on this one, actually, there is a fun fact, is that a lot of people talk about Mars 100 saying, yeah, it's not a real mission. And of course, it's not a real mission. It was just a simulation. And it was looking at the confinement. And they were saying that you are not, in Mars 100, you are not isolated, which is true. However, in the middle of the mission, roughly, we were stuck talking with the other guys. And how do we feel? Do we feel like we are in space or not during this return trip to Mars? And I didn't feel like in space because we were walking, we're not floating like in space. So definitely not. And my reason knew exactly where I was inside those modules. They are physically in Moscow. I knew. However, the feeling I had was of isolation. I really felt like those modules had been taken and put on some mountain or in the middle of the desert. And it really felt like isolation, even though I knew it was confinement.
Right. And this is something that a lot of people already feel like they're losing their mind. So there is a difference, people, between confinement and isolation. And unfortunately, if we don't stay home and we don't take precautions, we may end up in isolation. And that's not nice. That is being separated from your family, your friends, your loved ones, and also suffering, possibly, while being isolated. So this is something really, really important to consider. And you're right, Romain, it's the frame of mind people need to consider. And that's definitely a top hacks, is your frame of mind makes all the difference in the world on how you get through this time, this pandemic, this confinement. So, speaking of which, you're saying that, the difference is that there was something like a fire or whatever you could help each other. Did they teach you things like, in case there was an emergency, to sort of simulate what would happen in space if there was something like a leak, or what can happen in space that's similar to what can happen in confinement?
So in space right now, at least on the International Space Station, you have 3 big emergencies. And those ones, the astronauts are trained to react directly. It's fire, it's rapid depressurization, and it's toxic atmosphere. Out of those 3, for Mars 100, it was mainly the fire, which was our biggest threat. And yes, we trained we learn how to control a fire. We learn where can we exit the modules if we are locked and blocked in any corner of it. And that's pretty much all we had. But yes, we consider those emergencies.
And I like what was it? The last one, toxic environment.
Toxic atmosphere. That's for space. Yes.
But you know how relevant that is in a household with teenagers. Very relevant. Different meaning.
Yes.
Maybe because I don't know. Young male adolescents let out a lot of toxic smells as well. To be fair.
That's what I was told.
Right. Yeah. I have a bulldog, and trust me, toxic environment. But you adjust and you adapt, right? That's what.
Yes.
And so what would your hacks be for a mentally toxic environment. How do you get through? I don't know if you guys ever fought, but if there was ever a tense moment, were you trained on how to deal with the buildup of, like, were you told there might be a buildup of different opinions or cabin fever, as they call it?
So we were not really taught. We had some experiments which were looking at meditation as a way to cope with confinement. So some of us were doing meditation to try to mitigate those risks. But it was not, if you have attention, use that. It was more left to our own feeling how to deal with it. The main way was to communicate. However, something that at least helped me throughout these 520 days was to always remember why I was there. I had my two motivations and I could come back to that. And I think that today we also have a good motivation. We are confined in our homes to protect our family, our friends, our neighbors, to limit the spread of this virus. And this is really important. It's something that we should always remember. And the second thing that really helped me is that when I entered the Master 100 modules, I consciously told myself, okay, now those modules are my universe. Anything I cannot do here, I will just do it in a year and a half. And I had to use it a couple of times during that period. So I had some cravings sometimes, and I would just think, okay, when I get out, I will eat a beautiful croissant, and it will be wonderful. And then a couple of days later, it was out, and I could continue the mission without any problem. And to remind yourself that this situation we are in is temporary. It will have an end. It will have an end. So anything that we cannot do right now, we'll just do it a bit later. So it's not. It shouldn't be a big deal. Once again, easier said than done. But the motivation why we do that, and remembering that it will have an end, it's temporary, I think are really important to go through this confinement a bit more easier.
Okay, well, those are some wonderful hacks right there. To understand the difference between isolation and confinement, and understand that if you don't stay home and you don't take precautions, you may end up in isolation really by yourself, other than the medical staff around you who are working too hard to say hello and have a conversation with you. And secondly, you might get a craving or a little bit frustrated because you had plans for this and for that and for whatever else. But when it comes down to it, these things can happen later. Stay calm, stay cool, stay safe, stay home. Thank you so much, Romain. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks to you, Mary.